Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Girl Gone Crypto. I have a really exciting guest here with me today, Justin O'Connell, who has not only been in the Bitcoin space since 2012, but you also helped launch Bitcoin ATM, and today you're involved in a couple of really cool projects. So there's a lot of great things we're going to chat about today, but first of all, Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Leah. Thank you so much.
So, maybe just to start out, give us a brief history of Justin. Tell us how you got into the space back in 2012, and then what are some of the projects that you're involved with and things you're doing now?
My first job out of college was in the precious metals industry, and there was always a lot of talk about Bitcoin early on in that industry. Most of the gold bugs did not like Bitcoin. They argued that it wasn't backed by anything, and that Bitcoins were created out of thin air. So I always heard this discussion during the time in which silver was climbing to $50 an ounce, near its all-time high. It fell just short of 50. And then 1 year later, the price of gold skyrocketed to 1920. And during that time, there was a lot of discussion about Bitcoin. While I was at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas in 2012, I came across Trace Mayer, who I knew from the precious metals days. He is an early Bitcoin investor. He invested in BitPay and some other companies as well, Kraken. And he kind of shook me and said, look, if you don't get into Bitcoin, then this will be something you regret. So I started beginning to look into it. I started writing about it and gold and silver. And in fact, that day when he told me to look into Bitcoin and really kind of like participate in the open source community, I bought the domain goldsilverbitcoin.com and began selling gold and silver for Bitcoin at that time. And today we're still doing that uh, through BitPay, which means that we accept some of the other digital currencies like I guess Bitcoin Cash, etc. That's really how I got into Bitcoin at that point. And the first thing I was like, how do I get involved into this industry where there's not very many companies nor jobs, and really the only option that was available to me was writing. It was kind of a strength of mine, something I did a lot of in college. I studied history, lots of reading and writing, and so I began writing for some of the sites in the space. And I recently found a piece of mine, and I was unaware of this. I had forgotten in CoinDesk back in like 2013, and
Wow.
that was really kind of what was available to me at that time. And I've been doing similar things ever since, alongside running Gold, Silver, Bitcoin.
And so you're currently a contributing writer for Forbes, right? And so maybe tell us a little bit about how you approach the articles that you write for Forbes and what kind of things you're writing about right now.
I try to focus on Bitcoin, although a lot of my content, it does kind of, right now, I've been writing a lot about DeFi, sort of changes based on what is going on year to year in the blockchain industry. I focus on Bitcoin because I think it's had the largest impact, and it's still having the largest impact of any of the blockchain technologies. I also like to focus on Bitcoin because it's also like the most recognized. Blockchain is a complicated topic. A lot of people don't understand what Bitcoin is, but at least that they've seen it in pop culture. There's a lot of like rap songs, like Big
Right.
Sean's rapping about Bitcoin. He's not rapping about Ethereum. Pop culture. There's the movie Dope, which was released in 2015. Might be a good time for a lot of people to go back and watch that film. And my focus is on Bitcoin. The articles, though, are all over the place, just by virtue of people that I meet, and it's kind of how I get a lot. All of the Forbes.com writers, in fact, all writers get a lot of pitches from people to have them be covered or to cover these different groups. And really, it's kind of serendipitous how who I cover and when. It's just kind of like luck. Maybe I run into somebody at the right time. Maybe I'm in a particularly good mood. And lately, I've been really speaking to a lot of interesting people in the DeFi space, like Michael Anderson of Framework Ventures, and we were discussing about how in time DeFi will kind of lead us into a Web3 type scenario. Although Web3, there's not really any live apps. There's hardly any live apps on DeFi. We discussed that, and oftentimes in DeFi, there's a lot of discussion around leveraging Bitcoin for DeFi apps because of its security, which is better than Ethereum's. Um, and then there's a lot of discussion around like bringing Bitcoin based assets onto Ethereum. So there's some projects that are exploring the ways in which that you can issue assets backed by Bitcoin, proof of work on Ethereum through DeFi apps.
Hmm.
And I ended up becoming a Forbes.com contributor when I just emailed the chief content officer at Forbes.com. I just sent out a cold email and he forwarded it on to my editor, Michael Del Castillo, who I really have a great time working with. And he does a really great job of covering the blockchain space. And I was given an account and I've been doing my best to stay up with my Forbes.com contributor account ever since.
So one thing that I'm really excited to pick your brain on, you mentioned, that you often get pitches from people, and I feel like this idea of like being featured in Forbes or being featured in these big publications feels like really far off and intimidating. And people, they, especially I'd say, maybe blockchain companies, they're like, I wouldn't even know how to do that. So like, what are your thoughts on that and how people might be able to get featured in some larger publications?
Yeah. The biggest mistake that executives make is talking about themselves. So I like to look at the internet like a party. And when you show up to a party, do you automatically just start talking about yourself and all the things you're up to and how great it all is? Or do you kind of feel out the people around you, the audience, and try to meet them halfway and discuss the things that they're interested in? We have I think a crisis in the blockchain space of executives who think that their work is more important than it is, and instead of sharing the
Mm.
knowledge that they've gained by working in the industry and their experiences of being in this nascent industry or just being an executive, they want to talk about their PRs, their press releases, many their partnerships, many of which are well, let's face it, a lot of technology is vaporware. A lot of the partnerships are just verbal agreements. So like I would flip that on its head and never talk about myself as an executive and rather kind of like contribute to the dominant discussions that are taking place day by day,
Mm.
month by month in the crypto industry and contribute that way without ever mentioning myself. We're all burnt out on sales, especially in the context of social media and you won't even get a pitch like that past any editors. So I like to think in terms of like social media and like what the communities are talking about there might play with editors at the mainstream publications, but what definitely does not play is like cheap sales or ulterior motives, etc. Like if your goal in an interview like this or getting an article published is to talk about yourself and make a sale, everyone's going to sense that.
Mm.
Everyone's going to know what your ulterior motive is, and I think it turns off a lot of people. Whereas like if you take a more kind of research focus or educational approach and really just try to share your knowledge, that's going to play. People are going to over time know that you're really here to contribute interesting tidbits, facts, experiences, knowledge, hypotheses. And then over time, as your body of content expands and you have more and more content out there, you'll be able to kind of sneak in your sales pitches and they won't seem like sales pitches. People will be cool to hear what you have to sell because they've liked what you've had to say. And then in terms of like mainstream media and the rest, so we're like in this industry where everyone's talking about decentralization. We want to decentralize everything. Well, in my opinion, things have already been in many respects decentralized. It's
Mm.
particularly media. I mean, media was really one of the first things to be decentralized through some of the apps like Napster, if you will. Like we were distributing music to each other in a peer-to-peer format.
Right.
BitTorrent was a more extreme version of that, and our attention has been taken away from mainstream publications by industry publications. Some of the biggest publications in the world are now industry publications who are getting as many eyeballs per day as the Bloombergs of the world and Forbes.coms of the world, etc. I've I write for Forbes.com, and I recently had a piece that went out on ValueWalk.com, and it was just an opinion piece, and then it got shared by ZeroHedge.com,
Oh,
and
wow.
that post on ZeroHedge.com got far more views than I get on Forbes.com based on the analytics that I'm seeing.
Wow.
And I think that's a perfect kind of distillation of like what's going on in the media today, which is this decentralization. So I like to reach out to like industry publications or like smaller YouTube channels, etc., and like connect with them because like we all know we all like pretend to know where this is going, which is towards decentralization.
Right.
We're already there, And these industry publications are only going to get bigger and earn more attention over time as they, you know, gain reputation and put out good content. Google News, of course, over the last, I don't know how many years, has really kind of revolutionized this. Like, who cares about the brand, Bloomberg, etc.? Like, I look at, like, are they on GoogleNews.com? Because then they're probably getting a ton of traffic either way.
Mm.
And in general, like, another thing is that if you're an executive and you don't really have any product that's live, then you should be really grateful for whoever wants to hear your story and talk to you, because like that's really your like audience, and that's really the
Mm.
people who you have a chance to work with, instead of kind of like brushing them aside, which I see all too often.
Mm.
So I guess I don't know if that answers your question. Like Forbes.com, um, like it's got a lot of eyeballs on it. That's I can tell just by like the responses to my pieces. I get a lot of like inbound inquiries about getting about people being interviewed for that publication. But from my perspective over the years, like the industry publications are winning more eyeballs every day. And if you don't like, in hockey, you're supposed to kind of skate to where the puck is going. I think that's really what PR specialists and executives need to know.
No, that's great advice and even tips. I'm hoping that people that are listening to this and have wondered that question will, get some takeaways from that. And so, even just to kind of like break it down one step further in an example. So, like, you mentioned, hey, don't just talk about yourself. So let's say you were trying to, maybe get a little bit of attention on gold, silver, Bitcoin. Instead of, if I'm hearing you correctly, like instead of saying like, hey, here's everything we do, you would more approach it from, here's an educational piece about precious metals and cryptocurrencies and the way that they connect, or something along those lines. Is that kind of what you're saying? Focus more on your expertise than on
Yeah,
your company?
Yeah, I'd say like right now there's a lot of discussion around the coronavirus and its effects on financial markets, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a discussion that I see people are obviously concerned with and having. Um, Bitcoin as a correlated or uncorrelated asset, there's this debate that's kind of picked up where one side argues that Bitcoin's an uncorrelated asset, that it doesn't
Mm.
behave in lockstep with other assets on the planet, and then the other argues that it's uncorrelated. I would argue now, like I could, for instance, write a piece about how Bitcoin is absolutely a correlated asset, and how
Mm.
this recent crisis has really shown this to us. As the very first crisis where Bitcoin existed, in the run up and at the beginning of the crisis, we saw how it dumped just like all the other assets globally. And like, therefore, I would argue that Bitcoin is a correlated asset, that there's no uncorrelated assets under the sun. And, that's really got nothing to do with buying gold or Bitcoin or not. But I think it is like a more valuable kind of discussion than, like, for instance, like gold, silver, Bitcoin seeing a lot of volume, you should buy gold, or that, something a little bit more promotional like that. So that kind of I also do a lot of like communications work, so that kind of goes around like marketing, etc. And on that front, like sharing techniques that I've learned, work, or like skills that I've gained over time that I think could benefit people, like learning WordPress. Today I made a post on LinkedIn that was about like work from home apps that I like,
Oh,
and they're
yeah.
pretty like, they're everyone knows these apps in our space, at least. So there's like Monday.com, there's Asana,
Mm-hmm.
there is Slack, I mentioned, and then Zoom, which we're using right now, as like apps for those teams who now have to work remotely, can
Mm.
use. And I made that post, and I just noticed right before we started speaking that Asana, the company, actually commented on it, and they're
Wow.
an organizational kind of software for organization. And like, I'm pretty stoked that they commented on this LinkedIn post. I did not mention myself or any of my services, etc. It's just like
Mm.
something that I thought might help people, and something that I saw people were also discussing. Like, now we've got this new, I don't know if this existed before, it just came across my radar, but WFH, you seen this hashtag? This
Uh-uh.
Yeah, it's something I've seen recently. Work from home. which is kind of
Oh.
interesting. So I noticed that this idea of remote work, as some people have like put forth, is becoming a little bit more like common,
Mm.
or a little bit more considered by people, and like therefore we're coming up with shorthands like WFH. So like I would try not to ever talk about myself, because I think that like when you go to a party, you know, if you just talk about yourself, you're going to kind of put people off. I think it's the same thing with the internet, particularly social media.
If people got one thing from this entire interview, that is such a good nugget. And just to kind of circle back to talking a little bit about the market and Bitcoin and everything that's been happening the last week or so. You mentioned earlier that, some people would argue that the price of Bitcoin does not correlate to what's happening in the rest of the market and the rest of the world. But you're saying in your thoughts it does. So, what are the contributing factors to why you think Bitcoin fell in price this last week?
Well, I think that all the assets are ultimately determined by market psychology. Bitcoin is valuable because we've all agreed that it is valuable and that we really believe in the concept. And since all of the assets under the sun are ultimately governed by human thinking and
Mm.
psychology, Bitcoin therefore is correlated. And I think that amidst the panic that we saw start over the last 10 to 14 days, Bitcoin behaved just like everything else. It behaved a lot like gold. And I think moving forward, we'll see that while gold is generally seen as a safe haven, in the midst of panic, it behaves like everything else too, and it drops. I believe, based on like what I saw during the 2008 financial crisis, although I'm not convinced that we're going to be seeing another one of those. I think this is a distinct crisis that we're seeing now, that Bitcoin will over time behave much like gold,
Mm.
and therefore it could catch a bid quicker than a lot of the other assets, maybe US dollar based assets, and that Bitcoin could follow gold, albeit with with much more volatility. It's almost like Bitcoin might be like viewed as a leveraged gold position.
Mm.
Why do I think Bitcoin will act like gold in the markets? I think that we've all used this term digital gold a lot. I think it's really
Right.
cemented in our culture. Bitcoin is digital gold, and I think therefore we'll treat it as such, and that's where that price action will really come from. I think the last week we've definitely kind of like, in my opinion, kind of put the kind of put that debate to rest. Like Bitcoin is correlated, everything under the sun is correlated to the markets, and as the market becomes more sophisticated, furthermore, with things like SIX in Switzerland, which is like a Bitcoin futures market, the CME is in the market now with futures and backed, right?
Mm.
These are technically potentially tools by which people with a lot of money can manipulate the Bitcoin market. Silver people who invest in silver are always contending that the price of silver is manipulated by banks, etc. Whether or not that's true, I think that we could examine similar questions around Bitcoin, especially as the market becomes more sophisticated with these traditional financial tools built around it.
So, does the fact that the Bitcoin halving is coming up soon, does that influence your thoughts on Bitcoin as an asset class kind of following the rest of the market? Because traditionally we've seen some kind of bull run triggered, from a halving event. So, do you foresee that probably impacting the price, or do you think that Bitcoin is going to continue to trend with the market?
I think in the short term, where things are soft, knives are falling, and I expect as the news continues to come out of the U.S. This month, they canceled March Madness for basketball, but March Madness is on for the rest of us at a collective level. And anticipate this bad news will really fuel price action across the board. Gold, silver, and crypto assets will likely decline over the coming weeks. When
Mm-hmm.
it comes to the halving, I think historically we've seen this. We have very little data about what's going on around Bitcoin with halvings. We've only had a couple in the past, correct? And this is our third one.
Mm-hmm.
And what the general market conditions mean for these halvings, I don't think anyone can say. But in the past, we have seen that shortly after the halving, the Bitcoin price has begun to trend upwards. I do anticipate that once the market kind of shakes out this scare, this pandemic that we're going through, Bitcoin will start trending back in line with its sort of past action,
Mm.
insofar as that the halving is going to bring kind of the fact that there's a finite amount of Bitcoin in the world, that it's a deflationary currency back to the forefront. And
Mm.
that will probably lead to a lot of buyers. Right now, though, there's probably a ton of buyers of Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin's actually held some interesting levels just at 5K right now.
Mm-hmm.
It was at like 3,800 for a bit. These are good signs to me, although a lot of people fear that there's blood in the streets. I think that Bitcoin's catching a bid. And I think a lot of people are scooping up a lot of Bitcoin right now, and they're going to ride it up in the wake of the halving to probably all time highs.
So, I want to wrap on just kind of a fun note and talk for a second, just to totally shift gears about TikTok, because
Yeah.
you just wrote an article about the wolf of Bitcoins and basically how businesses can benefit from TikTok. So, maybe give us a little overview of your thoughts on the app and why you think there's maybe some opportunity there right now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that a lot of executives think that they're above posting on social media, but
Mm.
we'll see over the coming decade or so that those executives that are not above it and are reaching out directly to audiences are going to be the most well positioned to build a big business. And TikTok is a part of that. Vine was very similar to TikTok and it's extinct. But those people who used Vine and learned sort of the way that it worked and the ebb and flow of Vine were perfectly positioned to then capitalize on TikTok. And for me, like being on TikTok, right, it's really kind of like about market research and
Mm.
kind of learning what's going on in the younger generations, what's coming next in social media. On TikTok, we see like a lot of these video like memes, like whereas memes in the past were like just pictures, I think memes in the future, they're going to be videos. And we're going to be like the stars of the memes. We already are, I guess, the stars of many memes, but now they're going to be videos. And TikTok's really going to kind of push this forward. There's a lot of like discussion around that. People's kind of client prospect base is not on TikTok,
Mm.
but the people on TikTok every day only get a little bit older.
Yep.
And as it's, I think the average age is like 14 to 24 right now.
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, and just like that, these 14-year-olds are going to be adults. And I think it's becoming more accepted that those people creating content for TikTok are getting the eyeballs and attracting the followings. And right now that's possible because there's a lot of attention on TikTok. A lot of people are using it and scrolling through the videos, but there's not a lot of content creators on it. So there's the
Right.
arbitrage there that I think that a lot of companies are quite frankly missing out on. And like, what's the value to the bottom line? Look, I think building a business is about far more than a bottom line. It's really about our legacies and doing good. And I believe personally that those who do good things will then benefit monetarily from those things. And putting out good content on TikTok and maybe a positive message as well is only good for one's brand. It's better for one's legacy even. And I think like right now, for example, it's a great time to put out a lot of like calm, tranquil content that really helps people kind of get through their days, because I think there's a lot of stress right now.
Mm.
So like kind of going back then to executives to talking about their work, right? It's really more about knowing your audience. And like right now, those content creators and executives who know that their audience is more stressed than usual and that
Mm.
there's a lot of pressure on people and uncertainty, and are then trying to alleviate those concerns and like act as like a kind of a tranquil pond, if you will, uh, are are contributing the most to our society. And I think that society will really kind of reward them back. So for example, on LinkedIn, which is I think along with TikTok right now really got the most attention on it
Mm-hmm.
and also the most reach, Mark Cuban did a Q&A recently on Saturday, I believe, answering questions from small business owners about how they could steer or navigate the coming market uncertainty, closures all across the board. He didn't mention anything about his business is, or he just did it to provide
Mm.
value to the community, and he will be rewarded in equal measure for that. TikTok's the same way. Like young people right now, if you can connect with them, like Wolf of Bitcoins is doing. I mean, Wolf of Bitcoins is a. Are you familiar with Wolf of Bitcoins? He's
Yeah, we're
quite well
friends.
known.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't even know what he does for a living, but we all know who he is, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
because he creates quality content on Instagram, et cetera, and TikTok. And quite frankly, like over the last 6 months to a year, we've seen reach on Instagram like decline
Mm.
as Facebook tries to push people more towards paid ads. And that really opened up the opportunity for TikTok to capture attention, to make people excited. And, you know, in crypto, we're all trying to raise money to sell, it seems. Everybody's like, first thing they do, oh, I want to start a business. Well, let's grovel at the feet of investors and beg for their money. And then it's like, let's sell as quick as possible.
Mm.
But I think that for a legacy to be built or for real money to be made, like by a sports team money, short-term plays in startup world aren't going to do that. Someone's going to buy you at a good deal. They're also going to invest in you at the beginning at a good deal for them. And whereas somebody who's going to like looking at legacy or building a business small term or long term, they're going to really be able to build that capital and benefit off of it over time. And that's kind of where TikTok comes in. It's like if you're thinking long term, then it makes perfect sense. Oh, in 5 to 10 years, all these people are going to be the age
Mm-hmm.
group that I'm after, and I'm going to like have a monopoly over their attention, at least on this platform. And if TikTok goes away tomorrow, well, then you've practiced, you've got those skills, just like those who
Mm-hmm.
use Vine did. And when the next app comes around, you'll be positioned to take advantage of it.
I love it. Justin, it's been so awesome having you here on the show. Thank you so much for coming on and hanging out today. If people want to connect with you online, where's the best places for them to go and find you?
Well, if you're in the blockchain industry, if you just type my name in on LinkedIn, I think I'll probably pop up. And you can email me at justin@goldsilverbitcoin.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Justin.
Thank you so much, Leah. Have a great day.